Hey everybody, this is the latest 2018 edition of the Hogwarts Express train from LEGO, and I have motorized it using Power Functions, what they would call Power Functions 1.0 these days, so not the latest powered up system. And as I mentioned in the review of this set in its default form before it was motorized, LEGO did not make it easy to motorize this thing. They don't have any accommodation for a motor. They don't have any accommodation for any of the Power Functions components, either 1.0 or 2.0 in there. So if you want to do something like this, you will definitely need to do some customization, and you will need to have your own parts library to be able to draw from. I'm going to talk about a number of the options that are available to us, though. I just chose one that kind of met my desires and my needs, but there are a bunch of different ways to do it. As always, the easiest way to motorize a LEGO train is to just use one of these 9-volt motors, which is fully enclosed. This is it. You just add this anywhere. So with steam trains, typically people would just put this under the tender. And that's easy enough to do. Again, will require some modification, will require changing out a number of pieces. Like this just has a flat plate at the base of it. This has the pivot sticking up, so you'll need a hole there to accommodate that. You know, you will definitely need to add your own pieces. You may want to switch over to the standard magnetic couplers as well. Those look better and they also work better, and that'll do it for you. Just putting this one thing in. However, of course, that does require that you have a full 9-volt system set up. So you need the metallic rails, the metal rails that actually get power through them to transmit into these wheels, which then pick up and power the motor inside. And you need a transformer hooked up to electrify those. And that's an expensive proposition. If you have all that set up, wonderful. If you don't, then you are going to need to use just a regular motor of some sort that is going to be battery powered. So you'll need a battery on board. Now, the second easiest thing to do is to use the most recent powered up system, the Power Functions 2.0, it's been called system, because this uses a motor, and this has some extra pieces on, including the coupler there and the side little decorations on it. But effectively, this is the same size and shape as just one of these. So this is all the power that you need in terms of the motor and gearbox, but it does have to get its juice ultimately from somewhere. That somewhere is a battery box. But with the Power Functions 2.0 or powered up system, this is it now. So this is where all of your power comes from, and this is also the receiver. So for controlling it, you use the remote controller, or you can use a phone or tablet with the app running on it, and you just need to connect these two. You need to have these two things on your train at the same time, and then you'll be good to go. So converting using this system, you just, again, place the motor unit underneath the tender. It's the easiest thing to do. I suppose there are some ways you could do it with the passenger car, especially if you were to lengthen it, but I think it's going to be easiest to put it under the tender, and then just put the battery box wherever you like. The battery box can be placed in a modified tender up above, although it will need to be a good deal taller. You can kind of make some space for it here, but you'll need to remove a lot of the decorations, and you'll end up changing the size and shape of this, especially around the firebox. It'll need to be widened up a good deal, or you'll end up with a bunch of white and light gray visible. Another option is to simply hide this in the passenger car. There's plenty of space in there just to take out a couple of seats. You'll still see the battery box itself from the side. You might be able to figure out something to do to obscure that a little bit from the outside, but it will be visible to some degree. And also, if you don't have the battery over the motor, you won't have as much traction as you would if you did have it over the motor, and so you may need to accelerate a little bit less quickly. It may slip just a little bit in some cases in really, really tight turns. It's always best to have most of your weight over the driven wheels, but this isn't too bad of a setup, and it's probably the easiest there. And then you have what most people have who get into motorizing things these days, Power Functions 1.0. Again, a very, very similar motor unit, which is mostly self-contained, but it does need to get power from somewhere. Power would come from a battery box like this. This is a normal one that takes AAA batteries inside. They also have the rechargeable ones, which are the exact same size and shape. Again, the same size and shape as the powered up unit, but this does not include a receiver. So if you're using PowerFunctions 1.0, the most common stuff that's been around for years now, you also need to have one of these, the infrared receiver that's actually going to take the signal that is sent by your transmitter or your controller, and it will then also, in addition to translating that signal, it will also regulate power from the battery to the motor. So this takes power from the battery. It's actually plugged into the battery. The motor is not. And then the motor takes power from this. And depending upon what signal it gets, it'll send different amounts of that battery power. Now you could go directly like this. The only problem is, as soon as you turn that on, you're going to go full speed, which is not a good look for a steam train unless you're able to, well, no, I was going to say unless you're able to gear it down a lot, but you can't. With this, you only get one fixed gearing or fixed gear ratio. With the rechargeable ones, which are a lot more expensive, but I really like them, they pay for themselves over time. With the rechargeable ones, they do have a speed controller built in to where you can manually dial in your speed. So if you put this in a place where it's easy to access, such as over the tender, again, if you do something like this, as long as you have that top center section of it open well enough, you can put just a little lever on it and set your speed, push a button, turn it on, and it'll just go. You don't have remote control then. If it derails, if you have a layout that is of some size, or you have a tunnel or something, it derails at some point, you won't be able to turn it off easily, you know, so there's a little bit more risk there, but it will work. It definitely will work. The other options, the more complicated ones, are many, and they involve, again, using PowerFunctions, a battery box, PowerFunctions, a receiver, but then your choice of motor. So this is the smallest motor that they make. That's a continuous rotation one. This is the M motor, or medium sized. You can also make an L motor work, and this is what I started out trying just with my first little attempt of just kind of figuring out space, size, where I was going to put things. This will definitely work. This is a good deal more powerful. I forget whether it's faster or slower. This one is geared down a bit more, but these will both work. They're the same width, but this one is a little bit longer and a little bit taller if you're looking at it this way. I ended up using the M motor. It's plenty to pull the weight of this. This is not a very heavy train, which is cool, and you can add on additional self-made passenger cars as well. So my setup is to put one of these. I have a rechargeable one in there, but it's not being used for its speed control purposes. But one of these is in the tender, and I didn't have to do too much modification to the tender. I just raised the sides up a bit and then gave it a new top and hid away some of the wiring inside of there. But this is in there, and then the motor, in my case, is actually in here, mounted like this, vertically. And I'll tear this apart a little bit so you can see inside there to see how I did this. So the motor is mounted there, and then the receiver is mounted in the cab, like so, right up against it. So that puts everything into just the engine and the tender, so nothing is in the space of the passenger car, which means that the passenger car then is able to still have passengers in it. And that was something that was very important to me, and that's why I went for the vertical orientation with the motor. You can also do what a lot of folks have done for a lot of custom trains, just put this in horizontally. And there are a number of options for how to gear that, but that makes it a little bit more difficult to find space for the receiver then in the cab. I think there may still be some options, but I think this is a more compact layout. Now let me go ahead and, well, first of all, just verify, yeah, there we go, that this does work without the passenger car hooked up to it, because it's all self-contained, just right there. I set it up with a removable button sort of on top, so you can see when it's on, you can see a little bit of green glow right there towards the top. And now it's off. Now it's on. Yeah, so that's just for the sake of convenience and turning this upside down, you can see where the gearing is. So this is presently just two-wheel drive or single axle drive, which is plenty. Because I have most of the weight of the engine, or a good deal of the weight of the engine, directly over the driven wheel, and I've actually cantilevered a little bit off the back with the additional weight added in for the receiver and the cables and some of the other pieces towards the back. It's putting even more weight, it's shifting more weight towards that driven axle. So that works out just fine as long as you add friction rings. These are just rubber bands. The red ones are the correct size to fit these wheels. I put some on the front as well, just to put some resistance in there to keep traction on these wheels, so that as the train moves, these wheels will turn as well, just so you'll see them turning rather than all the weight being supported here and on the front truck here that's still able to move side to side. But you can see the motor down in there. See how it's almost direct drive, just 2 gears in total, and the receiver is behind there. So let me go ahead and, yeah, there we go. You can actually see decently well where the receiver is facing towards the back, but I am going to, like I said, take some of this stuff off so you can see inside a bit better. There we go. That shows you how the components are exactly laid out, with the motor vertical and the receiver just behind it. Both the motor and the receiver are shifted by a half a stud lengthwise relative to the rest of the engine, and that was just to get the axle to be, the driven axle to be in its original location. So that just required things to be shifted off a little bit. And you see that the receiver is actually sitting on top of jumpers right now. So if you look carefully, you see a half a stud difference right in there, and it's on top of jumpers. Ultimately, it gets clamped in with other things from the cab. Added some additional pieces under there just to get it to hold itself into place and to kind of, yeah, really create a clamping effect that keeps everything together. The motor itself is attached to the rest of the engine via just studs, so I've not used the Technic connections at the end of that motor, and the key there with the way the motor is attached ultimately to the axle is like so. This is exactly the setup that I used, and it's actually 90 degrees off from that, so let me just adjust that to be a little bit more accurate. The main piece that I'm using, the main Technic piece there, that black part, on Brooklink, it's known as pin connector toggle joint smooth double with 2 pins. That's a silly name. It's part number 48496, and they're very easy to come by, and it just allows that 90-degree change of rotation of axis in a very compact space, and it holds everything together pretty decently well. Just a couple of the smaller bevel gears does the job, and that's exactly what's sitting right there. And the rest of it is all just a matter of getting that to attach to the rest of the chassis. The lower chassis had to be redone because originally they used long Technic bricks that go the whole length, and all of the axle pins originally went through those 2 long bricks, and I needed to shorten that down, so there's just a brick that goes from here to here to hold on to these forward 2 axles, the ones that are not powered. And you can see that a little bit better from the underside there. And yeah, none of the Technic connections are actually used from the motor or from any of the driven items there to be structural. So it's floating just a little bit in there. You know, this is able to move forward and back. I have not found that to be an issue at all. That's just from the fact that they use non-friction pin connectors in here, so this is able to just shift forward and back a little bit. There are probably ways that you can use the little bit of extra buffer space where I have the half bushings in gray there. You probably connect something to those to make it even more sturdy. But the motor itself, once the full cab is on, is held in place quite sturdily, so there's not that much space for anything to move around. And that's pretty much the crux of it. Like I said, just everything else is just about making the connections, just getting it into place. You know, once you have the main components actually there and connected. The rest of it is mostly just aesthetic. I did have to change out the covers here, so this is just using some tiles just to cover up that whole space there, just to, you know, make sure that you still had a nice, at least smooth surface there. It required that I removed some of the curviness from the top of this segment, so it doesn't look quite as good, but you know, it's covered up decently well. And there will be many different ways that folks can come up with, possibly including even some additional curvature up there. And if you aren't afraid to expand this and to make the whole thing larger, there are a lot of things that you can do. But I was trying to stay as close as possible to the original design and the original size and shape of everything to make it look as original as possible. And then you do have to worry about routing cables. It's always an issue with power functions in small builds. It's just folding up all your cables, and if you need to put an extra piece, a bracket or something in to kind of keep that all tidy, don't be afraid to use a rubber band either, you know, if you want to hold things in place. But there it is, closed up again, just the way that I personally chose to do it out of many possibilities. You do still have that visible battery box from the back, and you know, you can see in the cab a little bit, but fortunately, you know, some of the black of the cable kind of helps to obscure some of that, so it still looks okay. And overall, you know, it's fairly compact, and most importantly, I do have full control, you know, full control from the remote, and I got this little button right there that makes it easy enough to do, and it does the job. And I'm still able to put passengers in the passenger car. It would be nice at some point to have more cars, because just one is really not enough, but you know, not having any electrical components in there was pretty important to me. And I think this looks okay, and that's just that. I said in the review that I would try to find some time to figure out a way to motorize this, and so I did. Very fortunate I was able to make that time. It only took me about a half a day from scratch. It definitely was not as hard as I expected, but you know, part of the ease there was having a lot of pieces available to me. Again, LEGO definitely did not try to make it easy by any means. If you have a 9-volt motor and you can just put one of those in, you have 9-volt tracks and a transformer, it'll definitely be the easiest way to go. If you get the new powered up system, those are a little bit harder to get a hold of so far, but as they become more, you know, readily available, then that'll become another good option. The option of just putting in a Power Functions 1 battery box and motor under the tender is a possibility, but it's strongly recommended that you have a controller in there, or at least a rechargeable battery pack, so that you can set the speed on this, because it's okay running at top speed. It's doable, you know. It looks very lively, maybe not very realistic. People tend to prefer to run steam trains at a slower pace and really enjoy it, but you know, it's another option. So there are a number of things that you can do, and certainly I'm sure there are better ways to set up a motor inside of the engine as well. This was just one possibility of certainly many. Hope that was enjoyable and or informative for you, and I'm going to get back to some other stuff. So I'll talk to you again as soon as I can. Thank you for watching.